for coming. And thank you, Ian, for the introduction. Quick little story here about Pinehurst. I was doing a book tour up in the Northeast over August and September. And Ian saw that we were going to be doing some book signings and some talks and stuff. So he reached out and he said, "Hey, would you like to come to my club?" I go, "Sure, absolutely." He goes, "Yeah, I work at Pinehurst." I go, "Super." I'm in Nashville and I'm going to be going to Boston. It's right on the way, and he didn't say anything. And so we
I don't think you said it like that.
Well, there was some
when I said send the books to Denver, Colorado.
No, I'm going to get there. I own a lot of responsibility. So we're going through the whole thing, and I go, "Hey, listen, I need to get you a book, so let me send you a book." And he gives me his address, and it's Colorado. I'm thinking, I thought he had a house out there. I thought this Pinehurst thing was a summer job. And then you said you were going to the Grateful Dead, I think, in Boulder, right? And I still didn't put it together. And then you asked me what we were doing, whether we're driving or not. And I said, "Yeah, we're driving." And you go, "You're crazy," because we're Boston, Nashville, the other way, So finally, one morning, we're trying to get it all figured out, and it's like 9 o'clock in Nashville, and he calls me, and he says, "Yeah, I'm about to get on the court for my 8 o'clock lesson. I just wanted to touch base with you." And I'm like, "Wait, you're west of me. How is it? Where are you?" And he goes, "I'm in Denver." He's like, "Oh my God." So I thought you were in Pinehurst, North Carolina. So that you say Pinehurst,
Yeah, reschedule the date.
So we rescheduled the date. So this worked out really well. Actually, I had another event in California that was supposed to be this week. It's got moved to next week, so this worked out really well. Right. So anyway, so thank you very much for having us. We're really excited to be here. Just a couple of words about Ian. We go back a long way, and in the tennis world. But I always remember when you're back in the schoolyard when you were playing with your friends and stuff, and you'd be goofing around your tennis and you hit a great shot, you see back and row, right? And you go over and hit a beautiful backhand, you see back and see. Whenever I hit a great ball, I go, "Ian Ayler." He had so much talent.
That's all I had.
To get great volleys. I was thinking, if I get a volley like Ian Ayler, you guys might have heard of me. But then I wrote my book, and I had some other problems going on too. So
that's funny.
Volleys. But
I wish I had your forehand.
But anyway, so thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely.
It's been wonderful.
Great to have you.
We're grateful to be here, and it's just grateful to be able to have our story be received so well, and just be able to share it with most of you. I was reading the paper the other day, and there was this lefty relief pitcher. This guy had pitched like 8 innings last year, maybe 7 innings before that, and he signed this multi-million-dollar contract. I'm like, God, I never should have quit Little League. I go, this was just, this was the future. But I did quit Little League, and as a young person learning sports, team sports weren't going to be my thing. I was a little kid. I didn't have any strength. I didn't have an arm. So if there was going to be any athletic future for me, it was going to be in tennis. And I was fortunate to have a father who was into individual sports, and he was into tennis. This is back in the 1970s when the tennis boom was hitting. I came to tennis kind of slowly. My dad would kind of sneak around a little bit in the house, and he'd go into the closet and he'd pull these giant wood rackets out, and they had presses and all this stuff, and he'd sneak off, and it's like, God, where's Dad going? It's like it was this mysterious sport that he wouldn't play with us. So finally, one weekend he was away, and the phone rings, and my mom answers the phone, and she starts screaming, he won, your dad won." And I'm like, "Well, he won what? What happened here?" So my dad had been away at a tournament. So he comes home, and about an hour later, and he pulls into the garage, and I figure anything that gets my mom that excited, it's got to be a pretty cool thing. So there's this big delay, and he's not coming in. So my mom sends me out to the garage, and I get out there, and my dad's in his car, and he's just cramping. He's just buckled over, just in so much pain. He couldn't get out of his car. So I get over there, I'm trying to pull him out, and every time I grab on him, I'm making it worse. And he was like a burn victim. And he finally goes, here, hold this, and he hands me his trophy. He won his first trophy, and I'm like 8 years old. I get this trophy in my hand, and my dad's like dying there, and I couldn't stop looking at this trophy. I was just mesmerized by this thing. I was like, God, I got to get me one of these, So eventually we get Dad in the house, and he's the trophy's sitting on the kitchen table, and we're sitting there talking about the weekend. He's telling a story, and I just can't take my eyes off it. I'm just fixated on this thing. So at the end of the night's conversation, I said, "Dad, can I play tennis?" And he didn't really say anything about it, but sure enough, the next weekend, our family packed up the car, me and my 2 brothers, Larry and Jerry. Larry, Barry, Jerry. Don't ask. I don't know what they were thinking. And we went to our little tennis club to play tennis for the first time. And it was a family event. It was fun. It was exciting. It was social. It was challenging. And my younger brother was quite young. My older brother was very athletic, but I was able to, kind of show a little bit of skill that day. And so somehow, some way, the next morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, my dad knocks on my door and he goes, "Get ready, we're going to play tennis." I'm like, "Really? We're going to play tennis?" Okay. So I'm like 8 years old, and we're packing up the car. We're driving out in the New England morning, and it's dark, and we end up at this kind of dingy little club. And learning tennis wasn't easy back then. This was, there were no junior rackets, there was no green dot balls or short courts or academies or baskets of balls. It was just me and my dad and his extra racket and a can of balls. One can, that's all we did. And I didn't even know what I was doing, but this is how we were going to learn tennis. So my dad didn't really, just enough to be dangerous. And his bedside manner wasn't very mannerly. And this was that old school father-son dynamic back then. So whenever I would miss, I had to run and go get the ball, and which was quite often. And I'd be getting an earful the whole time. He'd just be barking at me at 6 in the morning, and I'm crying, and I can't get anything right. But it was, those mornings were kind of memorable. They were tender, but they were tense, because he was determined that I was going to become good at something that he never had a chance to be good at. And he didn't really know what he was doing, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But in those nights, those mornings often ended in tears and drama. And for most kids, that would have turned you off to tennis. But for me, it had a different effect. It turned me off to missing. I kind of figured, okay, if I don't miss, I don't get yelled at. And it was kind of this quintessential negative incentive that got into my head. It's like, okay, I can make my dad happy if I don't miss. And we proceeded to do this dance for about the next 2 years. My dad would come in the house, he'd come on my door at 4:59 a.m. because 5 a.m. was sleeping in to him. And we had this little routine. He'd go down and warm up the car, and I'd run out to the front, into the garage or into the driveway and pick up the newspaper and shovel whatever snow needed to get shoveled out of there. And we would do this 3 times a week for a couple of years. And early mornings, and eventually I stopped missing so much. And at that point, my dad decided it was probably time for us to play a tournament. Okay. Has anyone here done the tennis tournament shuffle yet? Are you familiar with these? So I go to my first tournament, and it's nervous, and we're driving down there, and I have no idea what I'm walking into. My dad's trying to explain the rules to me, and he's got the map out. We're trying to find the club, and you get to the club, and you pop the trunk, you get your gear, you start this little nervous walk to the front of the club, and there's this big sign, tournament desk upstairs, and now all of a sudden you're really nervous, you don't know what's going on. You're the new kid, and it's this whole subculture out there that you don't know anything about. So I get into my first tournament, and I get through my first round. I've got to play the number 1 seed and the number 1 kid in our whole section. And he's got 3 rackets, all matching, and new clothes and everything. And I just feel like my insides, and compared to his outsides, I was done before I went on the court. But I hung in there, and I gave him all I could handle. I lost a really close 3-setter, and it was my first ever real event. And I'm walking to the car, and I'm crying, and I'm just acting out. My dad's, snipping at me from behind, saying, "Stop feeling sorry for yourself," and just chiming at me. And the boy's father came up to my dad, and he goes, "Hey, my name's Leo Power, and I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot of each other." So it was that moment I got introduced or accepted into this little weird tennis world, this little fraternity of junior tennis that was mysterious and exciting, and something I was going to be pursuing for the next few years of my life. And sure enough, a couple of months later, if you know the tournament shuffle, you can play one darn near every weekend. And so I go down to play my next one, and I get into this next event. Everyone's a head taller than me, and they all, nobody really knows me, but they're kind of whispering about me because I played well the time before. And so I went out and I won my first tournament. I was like 10 years old. Okay, and it was like the coolest things. I had my own trophy, and like the only time I let go of it was to get my milkshake, for winning. So I got home, and I slept with the thing. I think I took it to school for a couple days straight. I wasn't going to let go of that thing. But I remember that night because everything changed that day with my dad. And I always kind of imagine what was that conversation like with him and my mom that night. It's like, okay, wait a second, our kid's really good. We have just our second tournament. He's already winning tournaments against kids, older and bigger and stronger. What do we do? We might actually have a prodigy here. Because my dad was obsessed with special people. He had this thing for Mozart and Bobby Fischer, these teenage geniuses and stuff. And I tested real highly on my early aptitude test. He thought maybe I could be one too. So he drilled me with chess and geometry and just encyclopedias and all kinds of stuff when I was 7, 8 years old, thinking maybe I had the chance to be special too. But it didn't work out in those things. But tennis, he loved tennis, and it looked like tennis was the one I could be really, really good at. So from that moment on, my dad was all in on tennis. And I mean, that week, the next week, there was a line painted against the garage door for me to hit against. There was a toss thing put in my bedroom to work on my ball toss. There were surveyors at the house looking for, trying to see if we could have enough room to put a court in, and that didn't work out. So we immediately started looking for another house to put a court in, and he was pretty OCD about things. He had his own way of doing things. He would. He built all the furniture in our house from scratch. He just turned our house into a lumber yard. He built a computer circuit by circuit. He would build motorcycles gear by gear, and he built a tennis court in the backyard, surveying it, grading it, putting in the concrete. It was crazy. So that was the kind of intensity he brought to my tennis. And to be all into tennis, more than anything else, meant playing tournaments. And so if anyone's been doing the tournament shuffle here, they are quite demanding. You can play one darn near every week, and if you have done them and had any success in them, you go out to these events on a Friday, and conceivably you could be there till Sunday evening. So you're playing 5-6 matches over a 48-hour period, and you have to wear a lot of hats if you're a parent. You obviously have to be the clerical side of things. You got to get signed up. You have to transport them. You are the supply chain. You are the command center. You've got brothers. You've got a mom, and other activities at home because you're gone all weekend. So they're very demanding on everybody involved. And particularly, so when you're at these events, in the meantime, you're paying people like Ian and myself good money to teach your child how to serve, but of course they're out there playing all this nervous 12 and under tennis, and none of it's happening, and they're choking and they're acting out, and it can get pretty messy out there. And so what eventually starts happening is you are playing for victory. You're playing for winning. It's the pressure. The only return on your investment now is winning, and you had to win matches, or the whole weekend was a failure. Now, my father, with his kind of a temper, and the whole thing about spending these whole weekends away, we're playing for stuff now. We're playing for rankings and equipment and academy scholarships and all kinds of things. So the stress became quite intense for him, and he didn't really know how to handle this, how to handle his child, because he didn't really, like with all parents, you identify with your kids playing, and some of that identification is healthier than others, because a lot of people didn't have chances to be athletic when they were younger. They didn't somehow they find their own ego caught up in the successes or failures of their own child. And it's difficult to when your parent starts living vicariously through you, that puts a lot of stress on a child. And being a hypersensitive kid and having an overbearing, pretty temper-riddled dad, those weekends got a little tough. And those drives home when I wasn't successful got pretty rough. And so I developed a few tics along the way there to try to make sure that those weekends weren't so difficult. In my mind, I was kind of playing. It just seemed, you're a child and you see how your parents react to your activities, and it's not brain surgery. When you win, they're happier for you, and when you lose, they're not as happy. And it's impossible. They're not. They don't feel any differently about you, but they're just not as happy. But as a child, you're picking up on this. So I developed a little tick here where I figured, I wanted to make sure my dad was happy with me. So I started cheating. I just thought, okay, my childhood ethics were still a bit of a work in progress here, and I was playing a couple matches here. I was certainly playing that kid across the net, and I wanted to beat him, fair and square, or unfair and square, whatever it would take. But I was really playing this match. I was playing for my father's approval, and he had this little tick that he did, and you guys are, as parents of sports playing kids, we all have our coping skills, and everyone's got their own style up there. But my father had this method of him just sitting there with his arms crossed and his head down, and he would never clap. He just kind of made this his little promise to himself. He was kind of on a cool trip. He just thought the parents that cheered for their kids weren't cool. Something uncool about that, or the ones that were social butterflies or chart makers. Everyone had their little coping skill up there. His coping skill was just to sit there and stare. And of course, I'm down there playing, trying to look up there and seeing if I'm doing okay, and I could use a little thumbs up or even like a pinky or something, to let me know I'm doing all right. I'm not going to get yelled at when I get out of here, So when the cheating, you get away with it for a little bit. I certainly wasn't the only kid doing it, but I seemed to be doing it a little bit more than everybody else. But when the cheating wasn't working and I was playing terrible and I was getting my butt beat out there, then my tantrums kicked in because I just couldn't. I was mad that I was losing. I was a competitive little kid, but I was way more mad at how I was treated for losing. And I was a 12-year-old boy fighting where somehow a tennis result had gotten to become a referendum on my value as a young person. And that's the way it was getting translated in my head. I was somehow, if I lost, I'd end up on the wrong side of conditional love. And that was a weird energy to feel, because it was all love. They just didn't know how to express it, And the way our interaction was quite volatile. My hypersensitivity, his overbearing temperamentalness, and so things got real tough out there. I became afraid to compete in many ways, and part of being super successful at tennis, you have to make yourself perfectly vulnerable to an outcome that's uncertain, and with that, where you have to get okay with putting the absolute best you could do isn't enough, and that's not for everybody. It's tough. It's a tough thing. There are easier hobbies out there, but we would do this dance for a while, and I went through the whole gamut of choking and tanking and and tempers and cheating and so on and so forth, till my father just couldn't, somehow at one point he checked out. He just couldn't, he crossed the line so many times with me, he just stopped supporting me, and just said, "You're a failure, and we can't do this anymore, you should quit." I was about 15, 16 years old, but by that point I had already picked up another habit to kind of navigate the discord that I was feeling inside. I was 14 years old, we had moved to California finally, and I met some friends out there, and they had a van, one could drive, and every time I got in the car, they would be smoking something, and I kind of held off for a little while. I was still listening to John Denver and Barry Manilow. I hadn't quite crossed the Rubicon into a rebellious teenager yet, but eventually I tried it, and I had nothing but fun, and then all of a sudden I got the phone call, and they said it was movie night, we're going to go out, and so they picked me up at my house, and before I sat down, there was a cold beer in my hand. I was 14 years old, and I drank that beer, and it was hard to get down, but it was even harder to put down. And in that night, at 14 years old, my life changed. It was like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, where we just went from black and white to Technicolor. My whole world changed. All of a sudden, I realized it was possible to feel differently, and it was a pretty low bar. It was the best I ever felt, but it wasn't a very high bar. But all of a sudden I was tall, and I was handsome, and I was talkative, and I was funny, and I was personable, and I figured, well, shucks, if one can do that, might as well have another, two. Let's have two. And all the same thing, two. I was even funnier, and I was the center of attention, and all of a sudden my hyper self-consciousness just melted away, and I became a different person. So I had 3, and I had 4, and next thing we went to a movie, and I never had a chance. The room was spinning, they threw me out, I'm out in the field laughing and getting sick, and it was just a brutal night. But it was my first night drinking. So I got home, I woke up the next day, and my head felt like a piñata mid-destruction, but something had happened to me that night. And I just couldn't imagine going through my life not feeling that way again. I was 14 years old. And that night I got the wellness call from my friends, and they showed up again that night to go to a birthday party or whatever bullshit we were throwing out there. And another beer hit my hand before I got my butt down, and that was tough to get down, but I wasn't going to disappoint my friends, and I went at it again with the same intensity the second night as I had the night before, and I got sick again, and it was rough. And by the time I was 14 years old, I was already drinking alcoholically. I found something to settle me down. The next few years were quite intense. I became obsessed with feeling different. I was 14, 15, 16 years old, just getting high morning, noon, night, waking up, going to bed, trying everything. Before I knew it, I was dealing drugs, taking strong hallucinogenics, all kinds of stuff. And I couldn't even drive yet. But in the meantime, tennis was still getting played, through all this. And I was still kind of somewhat impervious to the negative effects of alcohol and drugs, and I was able to maintain at school and so forth. And then it happened. I grew. I just had I was 5'6", 140 pounds with a wood racket, and I was maybe number 40 in the United States. And all of a sudden I grew 6 inches. I got a new racket, these graphite edges, and I felt like a caveman who discovered fire. I just wow. And I didn't do anything different. I want to preface, I never had a coach. I'm completely self-taught. I happened to be in an area in California where there was just tons of good guys to play with. So all of a sudden, everything I was doing just started working. And in a matter of a year, I was kind of heading heading to the minor leagues of college tennis, but all of a sudden I broke out. And when I broke out big. And within a matter of a couple months, I became one of the top players in the United States. Unwillingly, I had no idea what was happening to me. I wasn't being built for this. But so I took that and made the United States Junior Davis Cup team in 1982. I got represented my country all throughout the summer until I got kicked off. Smoking pot. A couple times. It was complicated because I was used to doing things my own way. And I wasn't used to having a coach or people telling me what to do. And these people were trying to help me, but I might have been a little too far gone at that point to listen to anybody else. But anyway, I had a scholarship to UCLA to play on the defending NCAA national championship team. UCLA was big time back then. I came in, I was probably number 12 on the lineup when I got there. But I settled down when I got there, and I worked as hard as I ever worked at anything in my entire life, and I never wanted anything more in my entire life. And when it came time for the picking the lineups, I got the 6th spot, and the coach gave me a chance to play on this team. And I never looked back. I started at number 6, and I proceeded to win my first 22 dual matches as a freshman at UCLA. I tied Jimmy Connor's record. I set a couple records for wins in a season. I was 1 win away from breaking the all-time consecutive win record at 18 years old, and I could not have been more uncomfortable in my skin. I had no idea what was happening. I was getting all the media attention and interviews, and I had nicknames, and people were cheering for me, and it was so uncomfortable because I wasn't being built for this.
His nickname was Magic.
Magic Bus.
It was. The guy had magic on the court, I can tell you.
No, it was, it was complicated, and but when the dam broke, it broke hard, and it's interesting when we talk as coaches. We get parents come to us who see their little Johnny or Janie want to be a professional, and we think sometimes you think it's just delusional, but at the same point, it's just but when you're in these events, and Ian can attest to this, we grew up playing in these junior tournaments. There was greatness all around us. There was future greatness in these draws. We were 12, 14. We didn't know who it was going to be. Why couldn't it be us? But that has to start young. I mean, there's no switch to flip when you're broken. When you're 18, just because you win a couple matches doesn't mean that doesn't fix this little inner voice in your head that just has been telling you for years that you're not good enough. And that's really where the energy, the dynamic with my father and I broke down so badly, because that's constant berating and belittling and critiquing of his stuff. We learn from our parents. We mirror them. And I tell this cute story. We have a granddaughter now, and she, I'll get in and I'll do my goo goo gaga dog thing, and when she does it back to me, I'm like, I did it, I got her to mirror me. I think I'm gonna open a daycare. I've got it's a grandpa of the year, But we mirror them. We want to be like them, okay? And but when they're saying those things to us, the critical things, the things that you wish you could take back, we don't stop loving them. We stop loving ourselves, because we honor those words. And by the time I was 18 and I was on the edge of breaking out, I was heading for greatness, and I just couldn't support myself. I wasn't being built for this. So that moment at UCLA, I was 22-0, and 1 year later, I had quit the team. I dropped out of school. I was living in my van, drinking and drugging around the clock, wondering what happened to me. Okay, and it had been happening all along, but I didn't know what was driving my behavior at that time. And then there was the Olympic trials in 1984, and it was a hot mess. I thought maybe this would be the one thing I can do to get my act together, and I tried to get ready for it, and I just had a terrible experience. And after that, I didn't feel right. Something felt wrong. I had felt terrible before, and hungover or strung out, whatever you want to call it. But this just felt different. I'd been up for a couple days and down for a couple days, and I just didn't know what was going on. And I walked the campus of UCLA trying to find someone to talk to. And I remember walking into the psychology department and just looking for anyone to talk to. I was 20 years old. And I found this open door, and there was a lady there. And I just went in and said, I'm not feeling well. And she was concerned. She's like, should we call a doctor for you? And I said, no, it's not that. I don't feel right. I don't know what's going on with me. My head's kind of turning on me. So she got me to sit down and got me to calm down enough. And she got on the phone. She started calling professors. She couldn't really tell me what was going on, because she wasn't a doctor, but she was trying desperately to find someone who she could get me to, but she wasn't able to get anybody to answer. But she gave me a phone number to call and said, please call this number. And I never called that number. And I was 20 then, and it took till I was 37 before I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It's a lot of years. And it was messy. But we got through this. I went through some difficult times, and once that kind of opened the door to there was a reason fueling the dysfunctional behavior. I've been in and out of rehab several times, and I was finally able to settle down. I tried all the medications, that didn't work, but I had enough self-knowledge now. I knew what was driving the behaviors. I was going to have to kind of figure this out for myself. There was no book for me to, the complete dummy's guide to fixing Barry. That wasn't out yet. So I was going to have to figure this out, and through many graces of God, I was able to find a way to settle down in March of 2012. And I just celebrated 10 years of sobriety in March this year.
Yep.
So I look back on this, and there were a lot of people who tried to help me throughout. I just wasn't really ready. In my era back then, we grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and nobody was talking about alcoholism or recovery or addiction, or certainly not mood disorders, and there was no medications or anything like that available. So I almost want to give everybody a pass from that period, because there wasn't going to be any help for me, and I don't even know if I could have been helped at that time. I think back how rebellious I was. But what's neat now, not neat, but just we're at 2022. It's different now. We're talking about it now. It's in the public domain now. Ironically, when I started to write this book, I was going to come clean about my mental health struggles, and then Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, went public with her stuff, and Simone Biles, the gymnast, came out with her things, and Marty Fish, the tennis player, had put a documentary on Netflix, and there's been numerous other athletes who've gone public with this. So the timing is right. It's part of a conversation that's been long overdue. There's a lot of stigmatization around medication. I was just talking to someone earlier, even the names of the medications, the antipsychotics, we're going to have to work on this a little bit. We're a long way from it being comfortable and acceptable for people to not feel shamed by this. It's a ways to go, but I think we're starting the conversation. Part of my goal with the book here is to get out and be a part of this. I'm going to be working with USTA a little bit on their wellness programs, trying to help, kind of talented. What I would love to do is to be the kind of person I needed back then. With a talented. What if I roll into town today? Talented, troubled, crazy, wild. Okay, is there a way to keep young kids like myself today from destroying their lives and their families' lives and a lot of people's lives around them? I'm very lucky to be here today. Really lucky, and some of our friends aren't so lucky. We lost a few friends over the years, and so we want to just do the best we can to get these lives straightened out as best we can and when we can, and that's part of our mission moving forward here. I'm in a place now where I own my life. I'm authentic with it now. It's happened. This is something I'm not embarrassed about. The reception's been. I was so petrified when I put this out. I got to be honest with you. You don't, to share that level of your life with somebody. But it's been incredibly rewarding and positive, and just so grateful to be able to come up here and share my story with you all.
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much.
I forgot to mention, when he's going to LA, he's going to option it for a movie.
Ooh.
So he's going out there, they're going to be talking, and so you
But
kind of...
mum's the word. We're not supposed to be talking about it too much. It has been optioned, and we are in the process.
Yeah.
And Ian's trying out for the part of Barry.
Yes.
Yeah.
We sent an email out to Reese Witherspoon to play my lovely wife Twilight.
Yeah.
Right. So if any of you guys have any kind of questions, feel free to throw them out there.
Yes, sir.